Hello and welcome back everyone to Master Blender 3D with Wild West Environment. In the last lesson we left ourselves off by setting these nice type of bolts going all the way around on our water tower. The one thing that I did forget was adding a little bit of an extra touch at the very base at the bottom. If we have a look at the setup, we do have this last piece. So let's go ahead real quick and add that in. Going to select the tower, click onto edit mode, or Control R, and holding left mouse button, which is going to lower this down to a reasonable amount, something like this. I'm going to add another type of a edge loop. Click Control R, left mouse, right mouse. That way we can have something in the middle. We're going to then click free to go into face mode. Hold Alt, left mouse button on the side of the faces like this to get an entire edge loop selected. We're going to then click Alt and S to scale it outwards, and I think something like this is going to look quite nice. I do want to add a bit of a bevel, so holding Alt, selecting the edge, Control B, lower down the amount to something more reasonable, like so. There we go. That is looking really good. All right, so the next thing is going to be started to setting it up for a UV processing. And for that, we're going to need to learn a little bit about seams and sharps. I'm going to now play Seams and Sharps Basics introductory video, which I do recommend you going over to get a better understanding of how they work. And afterwards, we're going to do in the next lesson, we're going to start setting up this with UV unwrapped parts for some of those textures. So thank you so much for watching, and I will be seeing you in a bit.
Welcome everyone to the short introduction to marking seams and sharps, part of the course. So before I give you examples of what I'm actually talking about, let me just briefly explain what they are. Seams you can think of like seams on a piece of clothing, like a shirt or pair of trousers. The main job of seams is to make sure the texture that you're trying to place on your mesh goes on correctly, but more importantly, gives you control of how that texture will look. Sharps are marked like seams, but serve an entirely different purpose. We use sharps to give us control of how sharp and soft angles are on our meshes. This makes them look realistic. It is also important we do this not only for rendering in Blender, but also sharps carry on through to other software or games engines we only want to use, like Substance Painter or Unreal Engine as an example. So with all that said, let's get started. So here we are in Blender with our starting cube. Now if I click on my cube and go to my UV editing, you'll see that the cube is basically unwrapped in this actual way. So basically it unwraps like a present. Now if I come across and I grab this cube and I press Shift D, and then we press Shift Spacebar to bring in our gizmo, and we move it across, and now let's say I want to alter this cube a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press the tab button, I'm going to go into Face Select, click the top face, Shift Spacebar to bring in the Move tool, bring it up like so. Now let's say I want to unwrap this. Now if I grab this with L just to grab everything, and I press the U button for unwrap, you'll see that it unwraps exactly the same way. Even if I reset the transformations of this, it will still unwrap exactly the same way. Now let's mark some seams and see how that has an actual effect on our actual unwrap. So let's grab the top and we'll come down to the bottom. And what we're going to do is we're going to press Ctrl E and then come down to where it says Mark Seams. Now it's important to remember that it's Ctrl E to mark seams in Face Select, but if, for instance, we're in Edge Select, so if we come to this edge, if we press Ctrl E, you will get this option up as well, Mark Seams, but you can also right click in Edge Select and you can also see we can mark a seam this way as well. So for now though, I'm not going to actually mark this seam. What I'm going to do is I'm going to grab the whole thing with L, like so, and now I'm going to press Unwrap, and you can see it unwraps completely different. Now let's bring in some textures so you can see what exactly I'm talking about. So if I press Tab, I'll come up to my materials panel up here, and I'm going to give this a material. So I'm going to come across to the right hand side, click on my material button. So let's now bring the material I've already prepared. So if I come across this little down arrow, come on down, you can see I've got one here called wood, and let's click that on. Now you can see what's happened. We've actually applied our material to this object, but you can see it's pretty much a mess. The top of it looks fine, but the bit going around the side is all bent and skewed. So if I zoom out and I press tab now, you can see that the reason is that it's not actually UV unwrapped correctly. So how do we fix that? If we come up to edge select and we grab this edge, and now what I'm going to do is I'm going to right click, come down to mark seams, and now I'll grab the whole thing again. I'm going to press U, unwrap, and now you'll see it unwraps absolutely fine. You can see that wood's looking really, really nice actually on this mesh now. So what this does, the seams do, is actually gives you control of how this actual texture is placed on this mesh. You also need to take into account that this is basically an infinite loop. So if I come round and I look at this face and this face, you can see that they're going round. If we have no seam, when I talk about infinite loops, it's basically going around and around, and Blender doesn't actually understand how to unwrap it. So you'll end up with that mess we had before. Now the other thing to take into account is, if I turn this wood around, for instance, what I'm going to do, I'm going to come over to the left-hand side, the viewport of my UV editing, press A to grab everything, R90, spin it round. Now, the other thing I want to show you is that where we join these actual seams up is also really important, because you'll never ever get it perfect on here where there's an actual seam. So let me exaggerate this a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to press tab. I'm going to make this a lot smaller, and I'm going to move it into the center of my UV map, and then going to press tab. Now you can see that these edges don't line up whatsoever against this other side. So this texture here doesn't line up with this texture. And the reason is because we've got a seam down there, and that is an actual break in the texture. Yet if we come round to this side and I spin this round, so if I grab it, RZ90, and now go to this one where we can see, you can see that these line up perfectly. And the reason is because obviously there's no seam there. The seam is here. So you need to take that into account on your own meshes and objects, that when you're applying textures and materials, that try and put seams where you're not going to see them. So if it's on a door handle, for instance, try and put them on the inside where no one's actually going to see them. So always bear that in mind when you're actually marking your seams. So now let's discuss sharps. So if I bring in a new primitive, so if I press Shift A, I'm going to go across to Mesh, I'm going to bring in a cylinder. Now you'll notice that this cylinder has all these little edges around there, and let's say you want to make a cup or something, the last thing that you want is all these hard edge faces in there. Now there are things we can do to sort this out. So the first one we can do is we'll bring in another cylinder. So I'm just going to move this one out of the way. So Shift Spacebar, bring in my gizmo, move it out of the way. Shift A, bring in another cylinder, and this time I'm going to come down to where it says Add Cylinder and turn up the vertices to 100. And now you'll notice that we do have a round edge. But the problem is that we brought in 100 vertices to actually achieve that. And that's not something we want. We want to use as few polygons as possible while still getting a really good looking mesh. So how do we achieve that? Well, there are a number of things we can do. First of all, we can come across to this right hand side, and what we can do now is come to where it says normals and click on auto smooth. Then we can right click on the viewport and click shade smooth, and now you'll notice it's actually been smoothed off. But the problem with this is if I turn up my auto smooth, you can see if I turn it up all the way, it goes really funky, and that is because at 107 degrees Blender decides that these edges along here need smoothing off. So it doesn't give us a lot of control. If we do this on the other one, so if I grab this one, right click, shade smooth, auto smooth on, you can see again, even with lower amounts of polygons, we're still able to smooth it off. But if we turn this up, we're still going to end up with the same problem as what we had before. So how do we solve that? Well, if we come in now, press the tab button, come to the top, grab the top, shift select the bottom, press Ctrl E because we are in face select, and we'll come in and mark a sharp. And now you'll notice, if I press tab, that now it's got hard edges on there. This gives us control. So this is why we actually use sharps. No matter what I turn this up to, 180 degrees, which is the highest it goes, it will not get rid of those sharps that we marked. We can also mark sharps around the edges as well. So if I grab this one, and now because we're in edge select, we can right click, come down, mark a sharp, press the tab button, and now you'll see you've got hard edges on there. So it's very important that you mark sharps where you're going to actually want hard edges. It's also important that you get into the habit of marking sharps when you're actually marking seams, and then what happens is when you join two objects together and you turn up the auto smooth if needed, you're not going to end up with some meshes like this. Okay everyone, so I hope you enjoyed that introduction to marking seams and sharps, and as they say, on with the show.